We've had a ton of questions over the last year or so about our refrigerator. Stuff like, how do we keep it closed while off-roading? How much power does it need? How much does it use every day, overnight? How much solar does it need? How does it need to be installed for ventilation? How is it different than a typical propane three-way refrigerator? So today we're going to try to cover everything refrigerator. So sit back, kick back, because this is going to be a very detailed, long video, and hopefully we can provide you the answers to the questions that you have been looking for. Now, first of all, the main difference between a propane three-way refrigerator and a compressor refrigerator is in how large the entire cooling system is. So on the back of this compressor refrigerator, which will run on 110 or 12 volts, you can see this is everything that runs the fridge. All the cooling lines, the cooling fan, the little radiator, the little compressor pump, the little brains to the whole operation. So all it's taking out of the entire fridge space is this tiny space of about 6 inches by 6 inches all the way across the top section of the fridge. Otherwise, all of it is left for fridge space, for cooling and putting all your goods in. Let's take a look at a three-way fridge and see how much more space that takes up. The back of a three-way fridge that runs off of propane is all of this different paraphernalia, and it actually runs all the way up the back of the fridge. So you've got all these huge lines and the coolants and the little burner for the propane, and then it also runs on 12 volt and 110. Of course, it's very inefficient when it's running on either of those other power sources. The little burner also can be problematic because it only operates when it's pretty level. If it gets off level, that burner will just shut off, which is a good thing because you really don't want your camper burning down because the flame is shooting out at an angle. But it is a bummer if it's just off angle enough where you're just not going to have any cooling whatsoever. Also, we found sometimes with these three-way refrigerators, if the burner gets any bit dirty or dusty, it will fail to ignite, and then you have to clean it out, which is a more recurring problem with these type of fridges, at least from our experience. Otherwise, they can run 12 volt or 110, but they're very, very inefficient. So you're gonna burn through a lot of energy doing it that way. They're really meant to be propane primarily, but let's see how much fridge space inside you lose with this style of refrigerator. On the inside of the fridge, you can see you lose a bunch of your space with all these cooling fins, and that's losing a lot of shelf space. This top shelf is basically only 5 inches deep, and then we lose about 8 inches on the top of the fridge for this specific fridge. Also, the depth of the fridge is less. It's about 15 inches to the back wall. Obviously, this is a lot bigger fridge than one we've got in our truck camper, but all of them are very similar. All that extra equipment in the back for the three-way fridges is going to just take away space on the inside of your fridge. Let's go see how much room we have in our fridge without all the propane burning stuff. Now, on the inside of our fridge, we have a depth of over 17 inches. So that's an extra 2 inches of fridge depth space. And you can see there's no cooling fins in the back because all of that compressor setup is just in that top 6 corner cutout of the fridge. Now, one of the downsides is that it shortens the depth of our freezer space by 6 inches compared to the lower section because that's where all that compressor parts reside. Now, that's one of the huge advantages of the compressor style fridges. And you say 2 inches, that's not that much, but it's the difference between getting 5 dozen eggs carton to fit in a fridge like this, where it won't fit in a fridge like that. So it makes a huge difference. The other huge advantage with it is propane is a little problematic. It really doesn't work to use the propane freezer and fridge while you're traveling, so you really need to be running it off of 110 or 12 volt. If you run out of propane, it can be problematic because it uses so much energy. Unless you're plugged in, it could be a problem with just having it turn off. Now with this guy, it is crazy efficient for running off of 12 volts or 110 if you're plugged in. But with 12 volts, the question that we always get asked is, how much power does it use? And it's the same answer with either fridge. There's a huge variance to it because it depends on how cold it is outside. If it is, freezing outside, the fridge is not going to have to work very hard. If it's 110 degrees outside, it's going to have to work double time. So in general, if the overnight temp is maybe in the 40s or 50s, we might see our battery drop overnight between using the lights and the pumps and everything like that, about 10 to 20%, depending on how everything works out. So we have 200 amp hours of battery power, which means that we're using anywhere between 20 and 40 amps of power to run the fridge and all of our other stuff that we run with just our typical usage. So how much power do you need to run one of these things? Well, there's so many variants to that. Could you get away with a 100 amp hour battery? I think you could, no problem. 100 amp hour battery would work just fine, especially if you had enough solar and you had the ability to recharge it. If you didn't, and let's say you were in the clouds for extended period of time, realistically, you could plan on getting anywhere between a day on the low end of fridge use to maybe a couple days of fridge use, depending on the temperature. A bigger battery bank, like a 200 amp hour battery bank, gives you a lot more flexibility, but it all depends on how often that compressor kicks in is running. If the compressor is pulling about 6 amps of power when it's running, how long is it running is going to depend on a lot of variance from the outside temperature. It also depends on how often you open and close the fridge door. So if you keep it closed, like overnight, it's going to be much more efficient than during the daytime if you're opening and closing it. The other thing that people often overlook with these compressor style fridges, and really any fridge in general, is that their efficiency grows up drastically having less airspace inside of the unit. So if you have it packed out, especially a compressor fridge where it doesn't need the circulation as much, and you just pile it full of stuff, all that stuff that you put in the fridge is going to help retain that coolness temperature. And so if you open and close the fridge, it's not going to have to work as hard to get back to temperature. So it actually increases the efficiency of a fridge if you pack it very full. So that's another thing that you can do to change the dynamic with it. A lot of times people are trying to get away with the absolute minimum amount of power as far as how little battery can you have and get away with on these. And I think the better question is, how much room do you have for batteries? If you have more space for batteries, it's always going to be better to have more power. You're just going to have less to think about and less to worry about as far as running out of power and being concerned of, oh no, it's cloudy, or I'm parked under a tree or whatever, or having to find somewhere to plug back in. For us, with our batteries, we've never had to think about needing to move someplace or how to facilitate keeping the fridge running. The fridge takes such a little amount of power, it's completely mindless. It just runs and does its thing. It's not like propane where you have to go and find more propane or rush out or whatnot. It works all the time and just works well. So hopefully that can help answer the battery power question. How little can you get away with? I mean, you could probably get away with even a 50-hour battery if you're just running overnight. If you're running for a longer period without charging power, then go up from there with how big of a battery you'd want. I would recommend personally, if you're using the battery for other items, 100 amp hour minimum, especially if it's a lithium battery. If it's a standard AGM battery, I would go up higher because AGM batteries really shouldn't cycle more than 50%. So if you want the same performance as a 100 amp hour lithium battery, go with 200 amp hour of AGM or lead acid style batteries. So the next question people have is, how do you recharge your batteries to keep the fridge running? And the answer to that is we use solar panels, and we also have a DC charger that pulls power off of the truck alternator when the truck is running. We don't use the DC charger very frequently. It's primarily used as a backup source if we, for instance, were in the snow for several days and we didn't bother to clean the snow off of the roof. The solar was doing nothing, and then the DC charger was really handy to not have to go up on the roof, and we could still charge our battery. Now, if you're using solar primarily as your charging power source for a compressor fridge, how little solar can you get away with? Well, once again, it's probably not the right question to ask. I think the right question to ask is, how much space do you have for solar? And, can you put in as much solar as you can possibly fit? Because the bottom line with solar is you can really never have too much. There will be times, let's say during the summer, that you will recharge your battery very quickly. But if you use it during the winter time, you will recharge a much slower pace because the sun angle is going to be very low in the sky, and the efficiency of your panels is going to be down because of the sun angle. And even if you tip your panels, the sunlight hours are so much shorter in the winter time that it's just not going to be as effective. My recommendation with solar in general, and people will dispute this, but I recommend about 4 times the solar as your battery. So if you have a 400 or 100 amp hour battery, then I would recommend having about 400 watts of solar. And that ratio, people say, is really high, a 4-to-1 type of ratio. However, the thing with it is, if you want to use your thing mostly mindless, be able to use it all around the year, winter, summer, fall, and not have to worry about cloudy days, not to have to worry about partial shade cover, if you're parked in the trees, then that's a great ratio. Because with us, and not having to tip your panels, your solar panels, there's some people that chase the sun all day long, tipping their panels and just like carrying it around. Well, if you're gonna do that, if you're willing to do that, then yeah, maybe a 100 watt solar panel will be fine for you. And if you only go out in the summertime and you really enjoy just chasing the sun all day with your panel, yeah, maybe you can get away with that, and that's great. But for us, the whole point of going out into nature is to not have to think about, is our fridge or battery going to be out of power when we get back? We want to go out and enjoy doing outdoor recreational activities and just do life, not have to think and facilitate the stupid fridge all the time. So that would be my recommendation, is just go overkill as much as you can on the solar, and don't worry about tilting the panels, and don't worry about having portable panels that you're trying to angle towards the sun and all that. It's just not worth it, in my opinion. They're too clunky. There's too many other problems with it, including being worried about somebody stealing them and whatnot. So that would be my recommendation as far as the solar portion of it goes. Get as much as you can. We are running 200 amp hour battery bank lithium batteries, and we have 800 watts of solar on the roof. We rarely ever hit 800 watts of solar because the sun is rarely directly, perfectly at the right angle. We're rarely ever parked completely in the open outside of trees. There's rarely perfectly clear skies where you don't have some clouds cover. There's just too many variables to it, but in general, we can pretty much always get close to 50% or better of our 800 watts of solar year round, and that will do no problem with recharging the battery bank. So at times it's overkill, but a lot of the times it is just right functional, and so that's the key factor with that. We use Victron for our battery management as well as our solar charge controller, and we have the little wall mount gauges on the wall, as well as we have the phone app, so we can monitor our usage that way, which is really handy. And like I said, typically with the 200 amp hours, we will see anywhere between 10 to 20% power drop overnight. But that's not just the fridge, it's just using everything as we would normally use the camper. So if it was a 100 amp hour battery instead of 2, then on average we would be using anywhere from 20 to 40% of the battery. So I think 100 amp hour would work for most situations, but 200 amp hour just provides us with the ability to not really think about the power, which is really an essential thing. Now, we just recently added a 200 watt power inverter to the camper, and we're using that right now just to charge our e-bikes, and that pulls down a lot of power by itself. That's something that is a new power usage that we have, but even with that addition, we haven't had any problems with charging e-bikes overnight and then having the whole bank restocked during the daytime just off the solar. So I think 100 amp hour is a good minimum. 200 amp hour gives you more flexibility, especially if you're going to be using a power inverter. One of the other huge advantages with this compressor fridge is the ability to operate all the time. So for us, if we're pulling up to a trailhead and we're parked at, let's say, a 15-degree angle because it's on the side of the road, this thing's going to keep working. It can work up to about 30-degree slope in any direction, and that's a lot of angles. So even with off-roading that we've done, we haven't had any problems with the fridge not cooling or coming to a stop and realizing that all our food has gone bad. That's a huge advantage compared to a three-way style fridge. So if you're going to use it on any sort of rough terrain, no question, compressor fridge, the only way to go. If you're going to be going basically between RV parks and primarily just staying on level roads, then maybe you could do either style of fridge. I think the compressor fridge is ideally suited for people that are especially off-road, or that are boondocking, or that just want something that is very efficient as far as power usage. The other advantage with the compressor fridge is that it cools much faster. If you, let's say it's 90 degrees out and you have your fridge off and you shut the door, turn it on, this will be to temperature within maybe an hour. Whereas a propane fridge, you turn it on and it might take 3 or 4 hours to get to temperature. Let's look at how these things are installed. People have asked, how do you ventilate the fridge? What does that look like? And do you need exterior vents? Well, let's take a look at that. The fridge cabinet space. Now, our camper came with the exterior vent, which is where I'm at right now, and it comes with a standard roof vent. Now, these are the same vents you will see on all RVs that are running propane three-way fridges, because they need to have a vent here for the propane burner and then a vent directly up for all the gases to escape. And then it is sealed off to the RV somewhat. So with a compressor fridge, you don't need to have an exterior vent here or a vent up there. You can vent them completely inside the camper. And some people have said, no, you need to have exterior vent, whatever. You do not. If you read the manual, all you need is to have a little ventilation space at the bottom of the fridge, and then you need either a vent at the top, so you could put a little grill at the top of your fridge so the air can circulate from the bottom on up to the top, or you could put one on the side, just a little vent cutout. And all it needs is a place for the air to circulate. So the air has to be able to keep movement. So it has to be able to come in and have a place to go out. And so you can easily do that inside of your camper. They do not require exterior ventilation. And if you are really concerned, you can add a fan to it, but it's not a problem. It's really, people blow that way out of proportion. Now, is there any problem with having a typical exterior vent like this and a vent on the top? And the answer is no. It works just fine, with one exception. these refrigerators are designed to vent inside. So if you don't block off the vent on the fridge, the air from the outside can blow right into the inside. And we've experienced that quite a lot in our camper. And the best way of trying to seal it off is, for one, you can add a little bit of blockage for airflow, which this is the foam that was installed on our camper from Northstar when we got it. And they have a little bit of foam on the walls and some foam at the top. And that's just to help keep the air from flowing from the inside or the outside to the inside. The other problem that we had was because our propane cabinet is directly underneath our fridge, and they actually needed to install a vent for it, but they didn't, that the propane off-gas fumes can actually get sucked into the camper if it's blowing and you have your vent not taped off. So that can be a problem. So I'll show you what we did to tape off our vent, and any sort of blockage you can do if you have these exterior vents is helpful, because otherwise your outside air will come onto the inside. The other thing to consider with these is if you do have these vents is that you will get some dust in, and we get some tree particles falling in from the roof vent because tree branches get caught up there, and so that's a factor too. Would I get these vents put into my camper if I was building one, or if I had a choice when I was ordering? The answer is no. I do not like more holes cut in the camper than necessary, and it is not necessary to have those cut in. Our fridge is just mounted via the flange with screws in through the flange, and the bottom of the fridge flange is actually an vent. The whole thing is a vent because it's designed to be installed into a cabinet. And so this, if you look underneath the door here, there's this little grate, and all that goes straight through to the underside. And the whole reason for it is for the ventilation. This is the built-in ventilation for circulating the air through the bottom of the fridge and then out towards the top. So you can either have a vent, you mount at the top of the fridge or on the side of the fridge, just to allow that airflow if you do not have an exterior vent. However, since we have an exterior vent like many people do, this vent here is going to get the air from the outside. And especially when you have a pressure change inside versus outside with temperature or so forth, it will in essence suck air in. So we used to feel air coming through this vent from the outside when it was really cold out, and even more when it was windy. Even though we have that kind of foam insulation there that kind of helps limit how much airflow happens, it's amazing how much gets by. So this is an easy way to do it. This tape here is just HVAC metal tape you can pick up from any hardware store. It works really well because it's adhesive and it conforms really easily. It's almost like tin foil. So we just taped off the whole bottom of our fridge so it blocks that vent. All right, one fun connector trick and tip would be when you're running power wires out the feed wire, if you use these blade connectors, and these are heat shrunk blade connectors, that run your positive with the female side. So that way when it's disconnected, it's less likely that it can touch anything and causing sort of sparks or whatnot. And then your negative side of your feed side is just the blade side. And then reverse it on your device. So on our fridge, the positive is the blade. So the positive male blade will go into the female, and then the negative will go into the other side. So that's a easy trick. So that way when you disconnect your wires, you don't have to worry about taping off your connection or worrying about it touching something and blowing a fuse or whatnot. So it allows you to quickly disconnect your fridge and then reconnect it for installation and removal. So just get quality connectors and get them all heat shrunk and whatnot, so it'll last a long time. The next question people ask is, how do we keep our fridge closed? You probably saw a couple of our videos where the fridge door came flying open and all our stuff fell off while we're driving off-road. And this fridge is not great for latch system. I think isotherm compressor fridges are a bit better. We haven't had as much issues with those. But this design, the idea with it is that it can be reversible, so you can put your hinge on this side or this side and have the door open either way. So in order to do that, they wanted to just do a center latch for these. And this is just not a good design for a latch. At first it looks really slick because you pull this up and it opens and you go, oh, that's a really nice design latch system. But then you realize that it has this little lock latch here. And if you look at it, it basically is barely even making contact with that fridge latch. I mean, it does sort of hold it. You can see the place it actually holds it, the fridge door is actually partially open. So if you have something fall against the fridge, it would in essence be partially open until it hit hard enough, and then it just skips past that little catch at the top here and all your stuff falls out. The other thing that I thought, and I think this was an afterthought for them, but they added this secondary latch at the bottom. And the problem with it was that in order to open the fridge, you had to push down with your thumb on the bottom latch and use your other hand to open the top at the same time. And then it was a hassle every time you went to open the fridge. We finally just cut it off because the bottom latch didn't hold the fridge closed while you were going off-road. And so what was the point? It's still opened, and it was just a hassle every time we wanted to open it. But the biggest problem really is the fact that it has that play. So the fridge can be, the seal will be broken before the latch will even catch. So it's just not a good design. In essence, that when the fridge is actually closed, it's not even making contact with that latch at all. So our solution was to just build a little retention. So I just had a piece of steel, angle iron steel, that I just cut. I just cut the 90 off of it, whoop, just like that. And then I drilled a hole in it. And then we had one of these retention clips from our fast guns and an extra one from our camper tie-down jacks. And then we basically use that to then hold the fridge. So I'll show you how that is when it's installed, give you guys some ideas. And we basically just use 2 self-tapper screws, and then you can see the hole that we drilled for it. And the depth as far as how far in or out was just set based on testing with the door closed. So this is the bracket with it screwed in, and you can see we had to get it just right so we could clear the door swing and not have it catch. And then we set the distance so that way when the door is fully compressed and closed, we just slide this little lock in, and it in essence holds the whole thing from moving anywhere. So now there's no way this door is going to open, and it has done the trick. It is rock solid. And when we get to our destination, we just pull the little clip out and we just set it on the bottom of the fridge so we don't lose it. And we just use the fridge normally when we're parked, and it works great. We don't have to worry about the stupid latch at the bottom. And we tried lots of different things. Faith's fix for it was getting a spatula or something and jamming it underneath the door to try to keep the door from opening. But the problem is this door has movement to it, so it goes up and down on the hinge. So when you go over a bump, it goes like that. And that's how it can jump the latch, is just from any sort of bumping around. Even a rough road can cause the door to flop open. And what happens is that your stuff, your contents inside the fridge will fall against the door. So it puts pressure against the door. And then when it's bumping around, the door is jumping up and down until it kind of just wiggles itself loose, and then all your stuff falls on the floor. The other problem that we had was with the freezer. The freezer has no latch. It's just magnetic, which is fine if you're on road. But as soon as you go off-road, if it gets any of the freezer items up against the door, it can even get a little bit of a gap, and then you basically have all of the frosting and defrosting happening. And so what we did was just cut a little piece of aluminum and screwed it to the side of the door here on the hinge side, and we basically kept testing it until we could figure it out as far as the length goes. But essentially, when the door closes, that little piece of aluminum goes against this part of the freezer door, and so it just keeps the freezer from opening when the fridge door is closed. So that was a really simple fix. The other thing that we found is that actually getting rid of one of the shelves was really helpful, just in how we could put more stuff in the fridge, and also it allowed, I think, more weight possibly to be on the shelf to keep the shelf from sliding out, because the shelf could actually bump out and then fall down too, and so then you have your contents falling off your shelf. So it's really not designed well for off-road use, but you can make it work with some modifications. But I would say beware of the latching system. I would get rid of the lower latch if you have the same fridge. The upper latch is not really useful for much. You'll want some sort of other retention on the fridge if you're going to drive it anywhere, possibly rough roads. I think that covers everything that people have asked about our fridge, and kind of the differences and overview between a 3-way fridge and a compressor fridge. Would I ever put a propane fridge in? Heck no. Not even if I was on grid, I would not use a propane fridge. I think they are inefficient. I think they're slow to cool. They are not very precise with their temperature management. They use propane. Propane's a pain in the butt to always be filling up. I would avoid propane fridges no matter what. I think compressor fridges are the way to go. It's the same thing you use at your house in your residential application. So why would you use anything different when you travel around off-road or remote traveling on boondocking? So I hope that gives you a good overview. If you have any questions or any other feedback for other people, and you want to share that information, post up in the comments below, because it's always helpful if everyone kind of can help contribute to other people, just make everybody's lives a little bit easier. Otherwise, I hope you enjoyed this long video. If you stuck around to the end, give us a thumbs up. We'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Tell us about your spatula.
Peter mocks the spatula, but this spatula, amazing omelet spatula, by the way, kept our fridge shut because when we discovered the issue, we were on the road, and it was probably 4 months of this spatula getting shoved in the fridge every time we went off-road. I did have a piece of tape that I put around the spatula because it needed to be a little thicker, but this spatula never allowed the fridge to open.
Oh, what was your solution for the air blowing in under the fridge?
Oh, my beanie cap. When we discovered how much air was blowing in, it was actually, was it 2 degrees or 9 degrees outside? We were in the middle of a storm in Oregon, and it was just flooding in under here, and it goes straight, it's just freezing. Basically what I did was we had the neck warmers and the beanie caps, and I shoved them all through here to try and block it off as much as possible. It actually worked because the wind coming through was really, really cold.
Seems a little ghetto.
It was a little ghetto in here for a little while. I'll be honest, our fixes are a little bit nicer, and I do appreciate having the spatula clean all the time versus having to wash it every single time we stop somewhere, because I use the spatula a lot.
Thanks for watching Tips with Faith.
I know.
Bye-bye.
Bye.